scary, why it's fearful, and also hopefully end on a little bit of a hopeful note about what it looks like on the other side of going through this. So before we do that, I do want to talk about like the tools themselves a little bit, just to set the stage. There were a lot of great stuff about AI tools. There were a lot of terrible things about AI tools. There are strong opinions on both sides, and most of those opinions are, to the large part, right. There is bad stuff and good stuff about this, but one thing I hope we can all agree on is that the genie is not going back in the bottle. Your CEO is not going to wake up tomorrow and eradicate and uninstall Claude Code or Codex or whatever your chosen tool is. That's not happening. The tools we have now, as scary or exciting as you might think they are, depending on your experience or which side of the bed you got out of in the morning, those tools aren't going away, and those tools are currently the worst versions of those tools there'll ever be. So we don't really have a choice as professionals on playing this game and being part of this journey. All we really have a choice on is how we go through this journey and the choices we make while we do that. So before you decide whether or not you think these are good or bad, I want to tell you a couple of experiences. So like I said, I do a whole bunch of things. One of the things I do is a couple of days a week, I'm the CTO for an AI health tech company called Patient Notes. So Patient Notes, what we do is, if you're a healthcare professional, part of your job as a healthcare professional is to record clinical notes of a session. So I don't know if you've ever been in with your GP, watching as you're talking to your GP, they're filling in a software system somewhere. That's part of what they do, but after you leave, they also fill in a whole bunch of stuff. So there's a whole heap of clinical documentation that goes on if you're a healthcare professional. That takes time. It takes time to fill in that documentation. So Patient Notes, we record the audio of your clinical session, and we use that audio, transcribe it, and generate a whole bunch of that clinical documentation. When I first started getting involved in this project, I come from a consulting background, and so my first thought when I heard about this product was brilliant. GPs are going to use this to see more patients in the same day and make more money. GPs are going to, instead of seeing 12 patients a day, they're going to see 14 patients a day and make extra money. I was surprised and very elated by what the GPs actually choose to do with the extra time the tool gives them. Spend more time with each patient. Instead of seeing 14 patients per day instead of 12, they still see 12. They just spend more time with each patient. I was so happy when I saw that. You have those moments in your career where you realize how jaded you actually are. That was one of them for me. Another one, AI came into radiology quite a few years ago, and radiologists panicked because suddenly a computer can read an X-ray or an MRI scan better than a human being could. And all the radiologists panicked and thought their jobs were going to disappear. All of this media around said radiologists are all going to use their jobs. What actually happened? Because scans got back quicker, better than ever before, the demand for scans went up. Because it was, rather than it taking 3 days to get the result of an MRI, it took an hour or two, doctors were ordering way more MRIs. And so the number of radiologists went up. So rather than the doom-saying portrayal of this taking away radiologists' jobs, more people are now employed as radiologists than they were before AI came for their jobs. You can probably tell from those two stories which side of the spectrum of AI positive or AI negative I am right now. I do want to tell you though that I didn't start there. I definitely have gone through a journey to get to where I am now with my kind of stance on my belief of AI. And it kind of started for me when I had the realization that AI is just another tool. It is just another tool. Is anybody got enough grey hairs or lack of hairs to remember what we used before Git? Yeah? Does anybody remember what we used before Git? Yeah? So I remember when Git first came out and I started using it and I just couldn't get my head around it. I couldn't understand how to use this thing because my brain was wired up, folder equals branch, and suddenly I can swap a branch without changing the folder, and it took me months to get to feel like I was comfortable with Git. I don't want to tell you how many times I just completely messed up my local repo, deleted it and checked it out again. Because I just couldn't get my head around this. And we do this arc all the time with new tools as software engineers. We start off with confusion, how does this work? Frustration, why doesn't it work the way I'm used to? And then we start feeling competent about it, and then it just becomes wallpaper. If you went into a new job now and they weren't using Git, you would probably feel a little bit confused and feel like you should ask some questions about why, especially if they were using SourceSafe. And this tells you a really important part about the difference between tools and judgment. Tool is a way we exercise our judgment. I can become a very proficient subversion version control person. I can become a very proficient SourceSafe version control person. And I can become a very proficient Git version control person. The tools enable or disable us to do things better or worse than other things, but what we do as humans is make judgment on how we use those tools, when to use those tools, which features of those tools to use, and which features of those tools to not use. So I had this realization that AI is just another tool, and I started feeling a little bit happier about integrating it into my workflow. But then I fell face first into the next part of my AI transformation journey, which is that this actually isn't just about the tools. and I know this slide is in direct contrast with the slide before, and that's because my feelings were in direct contrast with what I was feeling before. I couldn't tell you why at the time, but I had this realization it's just a tool. And then immediately something else happened, and I was fearful again. And it took me a while to work out why. Every single transformation we've gone through as an industry before this point, every single new tool we've incorporated into our processes and systems are about how we use them, how we use the tools. This is the first time in an industry transition that we're not just changing what we do, we're changing who we are. The job I thought I would be doing, the things I thought my day would contain, the career that I thought I would have in 5, 10, or 20 years, that's changing as well. So as much as everything I've just said is true, this is also true. And the dissonance between these two things, holding both of those things at the same time, is really challenging to who we think we are as professionals. And there's a word for this, which is grief. We had this idea of who we thought we were. We had this idea of what we thought our career was going to be, and that's not true anymore. And we start actually grieving that person we thought we were going to be and grieving the career we thought we were going to have. And I started doing a lot of research on grief, what grief does to human beings. Because once I'd named this emotion I was feeling, I wanted to understand it a little bit more. So has anybody seen the Kubler-Ross 5 stages of grief? It's pretty well known. For those of you who haven't, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was a psychiatrist in the 60s, And she was doing a whole bunch of research on how people process grief. And she identified that there's these 5 stages we go through as humans when we're processing grief. Denial, this isn't happening. Anger, you can guess what that one is. Bargaining, well, maybe it's not happening in the way I think it's happening. Depression, oh God, it is happening. What am I going to do about it? And then eventually acceptance. And it's not always as clean as that. People don't go through this journey, you know, step 1, step 2, step 3. It sometimes circles around and loops and you jump forwards and backwards, but this is generally the pattern of how we process grief. And what Kubler-Ross found in her research was that any change we didn't choose in our lives, we go through the same steps. So it doesn't have to be grief of loss, of losing something, but any time our world changes rapidly without us having a say in it, we go through this journey. It's a form of grief. This is a change we didn't choose. For those of you who don't work at Anthropic and OpenAI, etc. So I think this is a really useful model for what it takes for us to transition from one side of this place of I don't want to use AI at all to the other side of well, we're going to get there. I'm going to tell you what the other side of this looks like. Because this is the journey I went on. So the first stage is denial. You review the AI-generated PR, you find the unnecessary abstraction, the CocoaPods dependency that could have been 2 lines of Swift, and you feel vindicated. Like, see, the code is crap. Everyone laughs. You post it in Slack, or if your company hates you, Teams. Everybody laughs at this. There's consensus. You know, this stuff is bad. This stuff isn't ready. And you know, yeah, but can it do this? And you give it this really obscure thing. It's kind of like we were talking about navigation before and the transition from paper maps to GPS navigation. One of the things that happened when we went through that transition was people had all of these little shortcuts that they'd built up, their mental model of the roads that they would drive down, and sometimes it was going the wrong way down a one-way road. And they refused to use GPS navigation because it didn't know about those little shortcuts. Until it did. And we moved on. So this feels good to be in this denial place because you're right. The code often is bad. It just flat out is. It genuinely isn't great some of the time. And being right feels fantastic, especially when everybody around you agrees with you. And we tend to get this kind of cyclic dependency in engineering where we like to tell people what they're doing is bad or the thing that they've created is bad. So this can often feel comfortable because it's not asking you to change anything about yourself. People often stay in this stage because they don't want to accept that they have to change who they are. The problem, though, has anybody seen AI generate code like this in the past 6 months? No. Being right about the quality is not the same as being right about the trajectory of that quality. And yes, when I first started using AI code well over a year ago, you know, when you used to have to log into ChatGPT and tell it to generate code and then copy and paste it, it was bad, but it's not anymore. It is getting better, and a year from now, it's going to be significantly better. And the people who stick in this stage now are right now, but they will not be right in a year's time. So if this is sounding familiar to you and you kind of think maybe this is the stage you're at in the AI journey, I'd suggest that you pick a problem you think the AI won't do well. And I don't mean some obscure edge case using a framework that nobody else builds that you custom developed in-house. I mean something to genuinely give it a shot and see how well it does. And you might be right, it might get it wrong. But if it gets wrong, what did it get right? And then try it again in 6 months. and see what it got wrong and what it got right then. And keep checking in, because these things are getting better at a scary rate. So the next stage, if you've stopped denying that it's happening, is anger. I was in this for a while. I love open source. I'm a massive open source advocate. And I also have a whole heap of friends in the creative arts who write books, who write blogs. I myself write a blog. And there is a lot of anger in those places that these tools stole our IP, and they did. So this is in some ways a perfectly valid place to live, because anger is energizing. You're not holding back for some reason that isn't true. You're holding back because they stole our stuff. You're not resisting change, you're just standing up for something. This is where I went for a while. The craft, the ethics. I'm not going to use this stuff because, you know, the friends of mine whose IP they stole. But if you stay here, there's two types of anger. There's the type of anger that checks out. The type of anger that just refuses to use this stuff on principle. And that's not a good place to be, because you're not moving through this journey, and I'm sorry, at some point we're going to have to all get on this bandwagon if we like it or not. There is a positive way to use that anger. If you find yourself struggling with moving out of this, the positive way to use this anger is to become what I'm calling the slop Robocop, which is the person in the team who builds the infrastructure to stop the shitty code getting in the code base. What guardrails have you built? What systems, what Git hooks have you built into it to stop people committing slop code? Use the anger, use your desire to use your craft for good in this. The next step is bargaining. So this is where a lot of senior engineers often find themselves. Yeah, it's good. I'll use it for the boilerplate stuff. I'll use it for the data mapping layer, or I'll use it to write the tests, or I'll use it for the stuff that doesn't really matter. The actual logic, the business logic, the stuff that matters, I'm going to write that. That's mine. There's an interesting thing going on here where there's this comfortable arrangement between you and the AI, and it feels like you're kind of using it as a junior engineer. That's where it was a year ago. That's not where it was now. That's not where it will be in a year's time. Whatever bargain you strike with the use of AI will not hold true in the future. It's like trying to negotiate with the tide and wondering why your feet keep getting wet as you just slowly step backwards, leaving more and more. So this one, if you find yourself in this place, my advice to you is to take something you built, ask the AI to build the same thing, and then compare the two. See what it is genuinely good at and what it's genuinely bad at. Find those places where your expertise actually matters, and the places where there's still a place for the AI to need a human interaction. You'll notice in a lot of this, what I'm advising if you're stuck in these places is to actually use the tool. Because if you have this idea of the tool based on what you used a year ago, it is not where it is now. So the next step, I was in this for about 3 months solid, is depression. And nobody ever puts this in their Slack status, I'm feeling depressed today. But from a lot of conversations I've had with people in the industry, this is where a lot of people are right now. This is what they're feeling. It's the senior dev that's staring at a PR that Codex just did in 4 minutes, that could have been a deeply satisfying afternoon. You know that feeling when you've built code and it feels good, and the AI just robbed you of that. What else can you feel but depression at that point, at least in the beginning? It's the architect wondering if the word taste really means anything, or if it's just a word old people use to describe skills that don't really matter anymore. It's the kind of quiet resignation that the thing you were proudest of about yourself might not be the thing that is valued in the future. That one hit me hard. The things I'm good at, our employer's going to value that in the future. It's real loss. It's this grief I'm talking about. And it's not imagined, it's not exaggerated. That satisfaction of building something from scratch, of solving a problem with my mind and my hands, is a real loss in the industry. Some of that is changing. Some of it is going away. To not say that would be dishonest, we are going to write less code in the future. That is just going to be the case. You're allowed to feel, if you're feeling this, you're allowed to feel it. It would be strange if you didn't. It would be strange if you didn't feel a sense of loss in this transition. But what I noticed about myself when I was in this, I've been burnt out. If anybody has seen another talk I did here, I talked about a time I was burnt out. The danger with this, burnout at least has the decency to be catastrophic and in your face. Depression doesn't. Depression is just a shrinking of who you are and the things you spend your time on. All my side projects stopped. I was like, what's the point of building code anymore? I used to enjoy crafting this stuff on an evening. What's the point? Curiosity fades. I used to read release notes for fun. Now I just don't. It's tough. What got me out of this was saying it. Speaking to some friends of mine in the industry and saying something along the lines of, I'm not really sure where I fit anymore. I'm not really sure what my job is going to look like and the things I'm going to be doing. Just saying out loud the things I was feeling. This is terrifying. I don't know about you. I'm not a particularly, despite the fact I'm on this stage, I'm not a particularly extroverted person. I don't like talking about my emotions and what I'm feeling and what I'm going through. But I did it because I felt this sense that other people might have been feeling the same thing. So I started talking about this in the industry, and it was amazing how many times people would say something along the lines of, yeah, me too. I'm feeling something very, very similar. And you can't solve a problem like depression if you don't admit that's what's going on, and if you don't talk to other people about it. So if this is where you're currently sat, my advice to you is simply talk about it. Talk to somebody else who has maybe been a bit quiet recently in stand-ups or retros and you know, is kind of not really showing up with the enthusiasm that they normally do. Maybe this is where they are. So the last step is acceptance. And it's probably not the kind you think. Despite everything you've heard, I am not an AI maximalist. There are big problems with these tools. A lot about them sucks. They're being happy. You don't have to be happy about everything. And you don't have to stop having opinions. I will tell you about all the places where AI is used where it should not be used. And I will tell you about all the places where I think the tools suck and when human beings have to actually step in. Being in this place of acceptance Doesn't mean you have to start every sentence with, you're absolutely right. It means you can hold these opinions and express them. But it does mean you've stopped fighting the fact that the ground is moving underneath you, and you've started trying to work out where to stand in response to the ground moving. Blacksmiths used to be the cornerstone of an entire industry. I grew up in the north of England. Anybody who knows anything about the north of England knows that steel, iron, coal, there were big parts of the industry where I grew up. They're not anymore. Things have changed, the skills have changed. The blacksmiths were probably sat there having very similar thoughts about the transitions that we went through. But the really skilled blacksmiths, the ones that really knew their craft, turned into the mechanical engineers that built the machines. So there is a place. Some of the knowledge went away. Some of the knowledge became the foundation for a whole different type of value. This, I don't think it's a tweet. I think it might be yeah, no, it is a tweet because it's got the stupid blue tick. This is Kent Beck. If you don't know who Kent Beck is, go look at some of the stuff he's done. Absolutely incredible. You will know him, you just don't know you know him. And he said this about a year ago, I think. I've been reluctant to try ChatGPT. Today I got over that reluctance. Now I understand why I was reluctant. That's interesting, by the way. You can see the grief journey in that first paragraph. The value of 90% of my skills just dropped to $0. The leverage for the remaining 10% went up 1,000x. I need to recalibrate. What he's saying here is a lot of the stuff he did in his job day to day can be automated. But the remaining 10% that cannot be automated, the value of that has just skyrocketed. And the job becomes finding out what that 10% is. What is the 10% that you do that adds the most value that the AI can't do? Acceptance is not about slipping into complacency. It's so easy to just kind of accept the world the way it is, but the landscape is still moving. Acceptance isn't a destination, it's a way we look at what's happening in the industry. If you're in this place, and I hope that eventually you will be, I want you to start teaching people and talking about the journey you went through in getting to this place, which is why I'm really looking forward to Box Talk after this.
Like you knew what I was going to say.
Not only, you know, for those of you who do teach, you know that teaching is a really solid way to help you understand something, but helping other people understand it, there's a huge amount of personal and professional value in doing that. Not as a guru and a sage from the mountain, but somebody who's just a step or two above the person in front of you. So I encourage you, please be really bad at AI. Learning stuff, we start off by being bad. Please be bad at AI, because it means you've started. It means you've started the journey of doing it. It's going to be messy, it's going to be slow, but that's not a bug, that's part of the process. And just quickly, for the leads in the room, who would kind of class themselves as a lead? Your job is not to drive AI metrics. Your job is to build a safe space so people can talk about this journey that I'm alluding to. Make it so that somebody can come to you and say, I don't know about this. I'm unsure about this. I don't know where I fit. That is the way this is actually going to happen. Trying to drive metrics is not going to actually get it to happen. You're just going to get backlash. People are going to bounce off you straight away. So before we finish, how much time do I have? Yeah? Cool. All right. I want to do a little bit of a vox pop of where you folks think you are right now. Let's see if this works, because this is always a bit buggy. Yay! Is it going to work? Woohoo! Okay. So if you scan that QR code, you'll be asked which stage you think you're in, and I'm just kind of curious where people think they are right now. Yes, yeah. Just right now. Drunk is not an answer. That's for later. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, yeah, we've got a pretty heavy end skew on that. It is anonymous, so if anybody does want to fill in denial, like, don't worry. I'm not going to come hunt you down afterwards at the pub and shove Claude code in your face.
They're denying that they're in denial.
Denying they're in denial. Okay, that's amazing. I bet you if I ran this 6 months ago, this would not have looked like that.
Way more that way.
Way more on the other side. We're getting there as an industry where we're realizing this gives me a lot of hope. Again, please don't take from this, I'm an AI maximalist. I am not. A lot of it sucks. Okay, so to wrap up, the genie is not going back in the bottle. This is something we just have to accept as an industry, no matter how much we might be resisting it. The tools are only going to get better, unless you've used Claude Code in the past 2 months, where it's actively got worse. We aren't going to stop getting these tools. The CEOs are not going to stop trying to get us to use them. This is not a phase. So the question you have to ask yourself is not are you going to use them, it's how you're going to use them. My advice, if you take one thing away from this, is to find your plus or minus one. What I mean by that is if you're at the bargaining stage and you go speak to somebody who's way at the other end of the acceptance phase and they're doing multi-agent swarms and pi harnesses, and you try and have a conversation, it's literally like speaking another language to somebody. Not only because the words they use are not going to be words you come across, but because the culture shock of talking to somebody who is way at the other end. So if you're in this journey and you're at those earlier stages, my advice to you is to find somebody who's a plus or minus one of where you are. So if you're in the bargaining stage, try and find somebody who's, maybe in the depression stage. Help them with the depression a little bit so they can pull you into it. No, that's not what I mean. So, just find somebody who's around where you are as opposed to trying to get this culture shock. And don't just talk to people who are in your stage, because that just becomes an echo chamber. So find somebody plus or minus one. The craft was never about the typing. This is a realization I've come to over being a software engineer for almost 30 years at this point. This is the first change that is about us. But maybe that's because we've been defining what a software engineer is incorrectly. The job, the craft, was never about the creation of code. The job was more about helping other people have a less shitty Tuesday because the product isn't buggy and has the features they want. It's about giving them the value of solving their problems. The way we do that is going to change, but we are still going to find the problems in people's lives and find the ways to solve those problems. The judgment calls are still there. Knowing when the elegant solution is worse than the quick hack, knowing when that thing is going to be so elegant it's unmaintainable, they're still judgment calls that we're going to have to make. That is the 10% Kent Beck was talking about. It's not about producing the code, it's knowing which code is the right code for the situation we're in. The companies I mentioned at the start, those ones who are failing with these transitions, it's because of two things. It's because they didn't understand that we're going through this journey of emotions and grief, and it's because they focus too much on the metrics of code generation. For those of you who have deeply integrated AI coding into your processes, you know that you're optimizing the part of the process that is not the bottleneck. Writing code was never the bottleneck in a software development team, ever. It was always something else. It was finding the feature to build. It was working out if the feature was the right feature. It was reviewing the PRs. The core part of it was not the writing code. The problem was we lied to ourselves. That's what our jobs was. It's not what our job is. So I really want you to remember what you're good at. You may be good at writing code, but you're also good at making those judgment calls. You're also good at understanding when to call AI on its bullshit. You're good at working out what features to build, how to build them, and if they've been built the right way. So when you're talking to somebody about this and the 2 talks you've seen this evening, and somebody asks you what those talks were about, don't just say they were about AI, say they were about remembering what we're good at as an industry, because we're not just good at outputting code. Thank you.
Are there any questions for Andrew in the room? Put your hand up. Surely not.
Just going to grab my water.
That's good. Actually gives me time to come up with a question. So everyone goes through this process at their own pace. Yet one of the things I keep hearing from the industry as a huge umbrella term is you need to adopt it now. How would you give people the freedom to approach it at their own pace when there is a huge push at the industry level to adopt?
Anybody who pushes hard for that is misunderstanding how much of a fundamental transition this is for us as the human beings as part of this transition. So I think you need people who can advocate for that. If this is where getting together any kind of transition like this is where, you know, if you're part of a union, you speak to a union, you speak to your boss if you're not part of a union. Try and get people who can say, yes, we get it, but this is hard. This is not just hard technically, this is hard for us as individuals. Now, think back to COVID. I remember I was consulting to one of the 3-letter banks, of which there's many, and they basically said, this is in December 2019, there is absolutely no way we can support work from home. Just getting the firewalls to support that is a 2-year project. Come March 2020, suddenly the firewalls could support it. So, you know, there's the metrics and then there's the humans. And I think you need people to advocate on your behalf in this kind of stuff. Having said all of that, the fact is that if we don't invest time into this, and often a way to push back on that is to say, okay, well, how am I going to do that? What time are you putting aside for me to learn these skills and to experiment and to be bad at AI before I'm good at AI? So if you can find a way, either yourself or to get somebody else to advocate for you on what that transition looks like and how we go through it, that's the best way. But yeah, it's not good where we are in the industry with that stuff. I agree and empathize. Anybody else?
I find that the ability of AI to save me time is only exceeded by the ability of AI to waste my time. It's very inconsistent. Like, I'll keep on using it more, and then suddenly gives me a mess, and I pull back, and I'm trying several different strategies, and I'm like, a lot of people have talked about using multi-agent, and I think that's the way I'm going, because I'm finding that you have to automate AI. Like, doing it manually, you actually waste a lot of time.
I think it's really important to not underestimate how early these tools are. The models have only got good enough to support this kind of stuff in the past 12 months. And those of us who know how long good software takes knows that 12 months is not long enough to build good software, especially when you're building something brand new that has never been built before. So part of that is, yes, the tools suck, but the tools will get better. The other part of that, though, is the words you were saying around, it takes me a lot longer to do something. Sometimes it's a lot quicker, sometimes it takes me longer. Roll the clock back 15 years and I'd have been saying that about Git. I'd have been saying, why can't we just use Subversion? I know how to use it, I know how to use it well. I don't have to do rebasing and all this kind of stuff. I can just use Git. So part of it is the tools suck. Part of it is we as professionals need to learn how to use the tools. The problem when both of those two come together is the moment you've learned how to use it, it's changed. Because it's changing and rapidly iterating, and the state of the art is getting better, and understanding how we use these things effectively is getting better. So all of that is basically saying, I agree with you. I think the only answer is to just keep your eye on what's happening. And if you have any L&D time, I would definitely spend some of that L&D time keeping your eye on what's happening, because it is changing so quickly.
Hey, Andrew. As somebody that hasn't written a line of code in a couple of decades probably now, I think I'm at the acceptance stage, but also at the depression stage at the same time. It's really exciting, there's a lot of potential, but I guess your talk tonight sort of talks about, or the themes are about, engineers getting their heads around adopting AI, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have a job. Like, you can be the best AI specialist in the world, but with the contraction of the need for the human to be involved in the process means that there will be less jobs. Now, I know there's a lot of AI washing about these job cuts, and probably a lot of companies overhired after COVID or during COVID. But the reality is that our industry won't need as many coders going forward. So that is part of my depression, which is that the industry is fundamentally going to change.
I don't know, and I'm not couching my words with that. I genuinely don't know. I can see it going one of two ways, and I do not know which way it's going to go. I told that story in the beginning of what happened with radiologists, how automating parts of their jobs meant that people could utilize the output they were creating and the value that they were creating much quicker and easier, which created an increase in demand for radiologists, not a decrease. Exactly. And so, I genuinely don't know which way we're going. What I do know is, if there is a contraction in our industry, the difference between the people who keep their jobs and the people who lose their jobs will be the people who know what that 10% is that Kent Beck was talking about. What are the things you actually do that add value, and what are the things you do that can be automated away? If you can't answer that question, you're probably on one side of the line, and if you can, you're probably on the other. If the line exists. And like I said, I genuinely don't know. It's going to be a fascinating next 10 years and a scary next 10 years.
Perfectly leads into my question. Kent Beck's statement of that 10%, previously you could go to a job interview and say, here is my body of work, here is my GitHub, here is all of the code that I've produced to date, and here is my evidence, my portfolio of the 90%, which is now worth $0. But the 10% is much harder for the individuals or the engineers that are trying to get through the interview processes now to pitch how they can provide that 10% value. Do you have any tips for people that are trying to navigate that process?
This has always been a problem for people who are not ICs anymore. So for those of us who have the misfortune of moving into leadership, it's basically what our current problem is. How do you go to a job interview and say, I motivated the team? How? Prove it. It is difficult. It is difficult. but I think we can look at what people do who are in those types of roles and how they talk about what they did in their job. And I think learning from how, you know, I would go for an interview as a CTO, or, you know, how somebody would go for an interview as an engineering manager or a tech lead, and how they talk about the impact they made and the value they added, that's what we're going to have to be discussing. Not I can code the Fibonacci loop with my hands tied behind my back with one eye closed with my nose. It's, you know, I knew how to prompt the AI agent to do that. This is a whole discussion in the industry right now, and nobody knows the answer to it. There's people who are on one side of the spectrum. Somebody I know who's the CTO at another health tech company, we were discussing how we interview engineers. He said he does a coding challenge, but he doesn't get them to send him the code that they produced. He gets them to send him their transcript of their chat with the coding agent, because that tells him everything he needs to know about how they think about the problem. And he doesn't actually care about the code that got produced. He cares about how they prompted the agent. How did they think about the problem? What questions did they ask? How did they assess the right approach? I think that's the kind of stuff we're going to have to start bringing to the interviews. Not what code I created, but what was my thought process in the creation of that code. But you're right, it's going to be a big transition.
Yeah, I think that's really long time. Thank you so much. No, it's been great actually. Like, if you have any more questions, we're gonna be.
I will be at the pub.
Yeah.
Thank you. That part worked. Can I now swap over to Keynote and have Keynote be nice to me? It can, yay. All right, thanks. That's a very tough act to follow. I actually hadn't intended to cover a lot of the same ground that Andrew was going to cover. That's a happy coincidence. I did want to deliver some of the same messages that Andrew was in his so much more eloquent and charming accent way than I'm capable of. But I think we're basically on the same page, right? I'm going to do a little bit differently in how I think about some of this stuff. But I wanted to break up my presentation, which was effectively, to reframe what I was going to say, my journey through those 5 stages is what I was going to talk about. But the message that I wanted to put in there around how I see technology, I'm going to do up front. And I'm not going to be as nice about it. I'm going to be a little bit more deliberately provocative, challenging in how we do this thing. If I get thrown down at the pub, great, we'll see how it goes. So I don't normally give a warning at the start of my presentations, but I'm just going to put it out there. I am aiming to challenge the way you think about this sort of stuff. So I do want to put then that, you know, as Andrew said, what follows is my opinion of the industry. It's not a fact. Like, it's just how I see it after having gone through that 5-stage journey, right? But first, I'm going to give you a little bit of a background, which I think hopefully will help explain how I got to where I got to. So, actually pulled it out. I was searching in my storage cage for something else, and I opened a box, and I'm like, oh, great, like I can use this. It was. I don't even know what to back up of. I haven't looked at that. I don't even think I have a CD-ROM anymore. How am I going to check out what's on the backup disk? But I'll figure it out. So when I first got into computing, my first computer was a 386 SX. I was probably around 9 or 10 when I got that, so early 90s sort of thing. And I don't remember too much about it, but I do remember the upgrade to the 486 SX, DX66. Like that was my best birthday ever I think I've had. And for me, that was the entire reason that I had the computer. Games. All of the different games that I wanted to play. And to be able to play those games, well, you couldn't just plug it in now or go off the Steam store and click it and it plays and it opens. You had to know DOS. You had to know Windows 3.1. When you upgraded to Windows 95, you needed to figure all of that out. Installing drivers, managing storage, because games came on a floppy disk that you shared with your friends, and then you got to overwrite the floppy disk, but there wasn't enough for all of your save files, so you had to manage all of that. That's what I learned. Like, learning how to use the computer was just a tool for me to be able to play the games. The games was what I was there for. Learning how to use the computer was just a way to get there. I did the same thing when I taught myself to code. I was seeing stuff on the internet. I wanted to be able to share things that I was doing, talk about games, everything else. So I learned PHP to be able to publish online to do that. So writing code was the vehicle that I used to achieve a goal, to solve a problem that I had. Apologies for those online who just got an earful of static. That's a bit better. But it was the computer, DOS, Windows, all of that sort of stuff was the tool to get to the end goal. Playing games, sharing stuff online, all of that sort of stuff. I then went through a very abstract and interesting career path. I was lucky enough to get hired at a startup straight out of high school when I was 18. So I went and lived all expenses paid for 12 months in Cape Town, working on what was Dropbox 10 years before Dropbox was actually a thing. It never would have worked. That's not the point. But it was more like a vacation than it was a job. I came back to country New South Wales, where I was born, in Dubbo. No software jobs there, so couldn't keep building code. Had to go back into general IT. I answered phones, did help desk. It was country New South Wales, so a lot of farmers, they would bring their PCs and it would either be full of viruses or full of dust or both. So it was either air compressor was the tool or antiviral software, and that was pretty much what I did. I fortunately leveraged some Linux experience to go and work for an ISP. There was only one ISP in town and they did satellite reselling. So I got to manage their Linux service for a bit, and through them I taught myself Cisco and networking and everything else because I had that opportunity to do that. Fortunately, I got out of country New South Wales and moved to Melbourne. Did some PHP work here off the bat because I realized that I enjoy building things way more than I enjoy fixing things. Managed to leverage my way into my first iOS role, which was at Yarra Trams, doing the very first tram tracker app back in the day. Again, just using to get to where I wanted to go. Since then, I bounced around. When AWS came along, I was working for a digital agency, and they brought me in to solve a core data threading issue. And they had a 6-month contract for that, and I solved it in the first 3 days, because all I did was add some assertions and some logging, and I'm like, you're not on the same thread from back there, fix it pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. So for the rest of that contract, they're like, well, we've got this AWS stuff, like, can you help us out with that? I'm like, okay, sure. And I've bounced around between those since then. Mostly I do iOS these days. I don't remember what my next slide is and whether I need to lead into it or not. What does that say? Right, yeah. So the point of this long-winded journey to tell you about myself is that I've learned a bunch of tools along the way to solve problems that I was given, right? Software, writing code, basically physically typing code, is just one of those tools that I use to solve a problem that I've been asked to solve. And now we get into the spicy bits. Nobody pays you to write code. As much as we want it to be the truth, nobody pays us to write code. We're paid to solve a problem. Code is just a way to solve a problem. Only one photo. I thought it was going to be way more spicy than that. It's got to go to quotas, absolutely. Doesn't matter where you work, right? The CEO of your company, board of directors if you're a big company, the founder of a startup, don't come in and say, I've got a bucket of money, I need to hire some coders. For some reason, I keep using banking analogies. I don't know why I use banking analogies. But the CEO of a bank doesn't go, I need to hire coders. They think in terms of problems. As a bank, I want people to deposit their money with us so that I can then lend that out to other people and make interest payments on it, and then I can make money. But having bank tellers is expensive, branches are expensive, and it's 2026. People want to be able to self-service their stuff on their phone without having to talk to somebody. That's my problem statement. They give that to their execs and they make it their execs problem, who then kick it down the chain to their managers, whoever it might be. Somebody looks in there and goes, well, how are we going to solve this? If they've never done this before, if this is new for them, they bring in some consultants, very expensive consultants, who then charge them $15 million to be told, well, you need an app. They don't tell you what kind of app. Maybe they'll charge you extra to tell you what kind of app. They also come in and say, well, we can build this for you, $200 million. No problem, easy. And your CEO comes back and goes, well, okay, we understand the problem now. Somebody fix it. Here is a person in the right division who will build a team to fix it. They then, hire somebody to start a team. That person then looks at it and goes, well, if you want to be an app, you've got to be in the App Store. We can have a web app that is wrapped in a native app, put on the App Store. We could do React Native, we could do native, fully native, whatever they want. They present it all back up to the CEO, you get a stamp, you get a budget. CEO says, great, you've got $50 million to deliver this. We're still not talking about code. Nowhere in this have we spoken about code at all. That person that was hired to run that project then looks in and goes, well, we want to do native, all of that sort of stuff. In order to do that, I'm going to need some iOS engineers, I'm going to need some Android engineers, and we're going to need to hire those people. That person cares about people that can write code. But that person is spending the CEO's money that he was given. The person that's paying for the thing just wants their problem solved. They don't care about the code that actually comes out of that, right? So, if you, I'm going to skip that one because that doesn't make sense now. So you've hired your coders, right? They care about the code. CEO doesn't care about the code. Get through there. So I don't see myself, even though I put that on LinkedIn, as a software engineer. Right? That's just how I'm marketing myself today. But that's not how I see myself. My job and the thing that I get paid to do is to solve problems. To bring it back to what Andrew was talking about, it's that 10%. It's always been about that 10%. The writing code is just a way for me to do that 10%, to sell that 10%. I think to your question, your GitHub corpus that you then take into an interview, yes, it's code, but it's code you use to solve a problem. Still valuable. You solve the problem. Here is the evidence I solved the problem. And then you talk about how you solved the problem. But it's all about solving problems. It's not about the code. It's never been about the code. Okay. So that was my provocative part over. For the rest of this, see how long we've got in terms of time, is to talk about my journey. So to frame it in what Andrew said, I'm going to skip pretty much directly from how I got from denial straight to acceptance. Didn't actually happen that way in real life, but what I'm going to talk about is the way I used Claude and the things that I built with Claude to help me learn how to use the tool, to leverage it, and to get the way through. No point reading that. That's just a photo I found, a stock photo I found on the internet. It doesn't mean anything at all. So 12 months or so, give or take, I was in denial. I said here, I didn't really get it. I didn't see the value of it. I was in denial. Having a chatbot interface, even if it was embedded in your IDE, was still much slower to me to write a prompt that worked, get something valuable out of it, copy paste it into what I was trying to do. Or if you're lucky enough that it wrote straight in, great. But it was still faster for me to just do it myself. Still faster for me to know the problem, understand the problem, write the code to fix the problem, move on. Obviously, that's moved a long way in the past 12 months, but that's where I was 12 months ago. I only learn, and which comes back to your last slide, Andrew, by doing stuff, making mistakes, trying it. Can't watch YouTube videos and pick something up. I can't read blog posts and pick it up. Although I'd much rather a blog post over a YouTube video. Just can't. Don't have the patience for 20 minutes of how to use Claude. It doesn't work. So I have to try it myself, figure out what went wrong, fix it, keep going. So I needed in order for me to really get my head around how to use Claude, I needed a project that I could throw it at, understand how it worked, and go from there. And fortunately, capitalism came to the rescue on this one, because one SaaS service that I was using for something decided, all right, we're going to raise our prices by $40 a month. And I'm like, well, I'm using 10% of your product, and now you want me to pay $40 a month extra for it. Can I just spend that $40 on a Claude Pro subscription for a month, get it to try and solve the problem for me? And it did. Something that helped me a lot was the brainstorming superpower, and actually, iterating on specs, going through the development cycle, figuring out actually the tools can do a lot of the work for you. It can ask you the right question. It can help you get a spec, review the spec, approve the spec, move on to the next phase and on to the next phase. For reasons that I didn't ask it, it chose to do this in Python. I didn't tell it to do it in Swift or in something that I could do. I just let it go with what it thought was the most appropriate tool for the job. Now I can read Python, but unless I've got a syntax website open next to me, I can't really write Python. It would take me a long time to write Python. But it didn't really matter, right? The thing that I cared about was that it worked and that I could save myself $40 a month. That's what I cared about. But it failed. First run was terrible. We tried again, I refined my prompt, we tried again, didn't work. That moment for me was like, oh, this is how you hold Claude code, was instead of letting it run and then me copy pasting errors back into Claude and figuring it out, I was like, well, Claude, you run that. Read the error that comes out, fix it. Keep iterating until you get it right. We added a dry run mode, and then it just kept iterating on dry run mode until it solved, as far as it could see, all of the bugs that were there when it tried to run. I ran it properly the first time, and it worked great the first time. Some code that I'd never read, never written, worked. I was measuring it by its output, not by the quality of what was in a text file at the end of the day. Now, there were a bunch of stuff that went wrong. There were a bunch of edge cases once we actually got into doing it properly. It had made very thin decisions around error handling. If I had written all of that code as I went, I would have caught that stuff. Because you write an expression, you think about the expression, you're like, okay, where's the way this could fail? All of that sort of stuff. But when you're thinking at a prompt level, you've got to be more explicit about that. There's different ways of holding the tool, but it's a different outcome at the end, or it's the same outcome at the end. Next property. Never read it. Don't need to read it. It's an internal tool just for me, right? It's just not going into production. It's not going to be on anybody's devices. It's a tool that I use at home. Saves me some money, and I'd stop paying for that SaaS product entirely. So it's not only did I save the $40, I saved more than $40. $40 of them that was reinvested into a Claude subscription, but that's just the beginning of the problem. It really is. Yes, so every time that I tried to use the tools previously, I figured out by having a project that I could work on, it wasn't that the tools were bad. The tools were okay. It was that I was holding the tools wrong. I didn't understand the tools correctly. And and the output I was getting from not holding the tools correctly, I was looking at it and going, well, I could do that better myself. I did 2 slides in one. That was pretty good. Next project I gave it was AWS dropped a billing MCP to help Claude speak AWS and interpret AWS bills. And ever since I had been using AWS, I've always had something running. And it got up to, as you can see there, this is in US dollars, about $130 a month at peak. I had done some stuff before this, so it was probably around $70 or $80 a month normally. Before this one, you only have 12 months worth of data in the history graph thing. But I gave that to Claude and I said, good, tell me about my AWS spend. And it did. It broke it down, all of the stuff that I could have got from the website, it explained to me. And then I'm like, well, here's an AWS CLI with a read-only configured token. Go and find out what all this stuff is. Because I've had stuff in there for a decade almost that I had no idea what a lot of it was, that I was still paying for. It went and pulled access logs for buckets, for other things. It's gone dependency graphs for this service uses this service, it's configured over here, the IAM roles are over there. And it came back with me a list of things that said, well, you haven't used this in 18 months, you haven't used this in 3 years. And it's like, well, we can save us a bucket of money. And you can see this happened at the end of December, where I got rid of all of the other services because it had done that dependency analysis and said, well, you're not using all of this stuff. You're paying for it, but you're not using it. And now the only thing that's really left, aside from a couple of little bits, is my S3 buckets or my backups. So it saved me around $95 overall, which then my brain's like, well, the Claude Max 5X is, kind of, so it's like $100. Spoiler alert, I'm now on the 20X, and I actually use it to the point where I would be well over the 5X limit. Next project that I tackled, home automation stuff. I have, since before COVID, I think, or around COVID, had at least smart light bulbs in every room in my house. These are the downlight ones, and everybody knows modern downlights just have a normal plug on them, so you just pop the old ones out, pop new ones in. Officially, an electrician's supposed to do that, and hopefully nobody's watching this stream that's going to get me in trouble. But it's easy, right? And in being in a Hue ecosystem, I grabbed some motion sensors and stuff, so my hallway has a motion sensor, my stairwell has a motion sensor, and my outdoor light, my front porch, has a motion sensor. And because I like playing with things, I've got my little home Linux server. I installed Home Assistant on there, and I fed all of this stuff into Home Assistant. And I looked at it, and I'm like, wow, look at all this data. It's got charts and stuff, and I can see what this is going on. The UX is terrible. And I didn't really know what I could do with all of the data, but I've had data for like 8 years worth of data in there at that point, maybe closer to 5 years. And my wife is wonderfully tech savvy, but she doesn't have the patience or the desire to go and learn Home Assistant or whatever else, like Homebridge and other things that I'd installed to manage all of this stuff. So she mostly ignored it. We had Siri set up to turn lights on and off, and the motion sensors worked, and she didn't want to know anything about the rest of it. Fair enough. But I had all this data, I wanted to do something with it, and I wanted to make it especially easier for if something goes wrong, for Sarah to figure out what went wrong. So I got Claude to build me a little home intranet. Yes, we call our house the Goose House. That's just a long-standing thing now. It has links to all of our internal things that run. We've got server status, so all the containers that are running on there, they report health to Uptime Kuma, which I then render there. Media stuff, climate stuff, weather stuff, network stuff, energy stuff. I'll get into those in a little bit more detail in the next one. But this is kind of what I really wanted. I wanted an interactive map of my house, or my townhouse, that had all of the sensors illustrated. You could interact with it. So you can choose, this one has chosen the bedroom. There's 2 lights in the bedroom. Bedroom climate controls, just a Sensibo IR remote that points at the thing itself, and some media stuff at the bottom. This was kind of what I had in mind. This is what I really wanted. And you can change office rooms, so you can see This is a screenshot at the time. Lights were on in the hallway and the living room because I just wanted to visualize all my sensors and all my data and everything else. We took it a step further, because of course we did. We, yes. We'll keep saying that. All my temperature sensors around the house, because the hue motion sensors also have a temperature sensor in them, and the sensor bows does as well. Again, the same climate control stuff. Network stats. You know, if my internet goes down, we'll know. Speed tests, because things aren't reliable and they just want it anyway. I pulled up an integration with my energy company to pull down prices and usage. So I get that as a daily dump from them, can visualize what that looks like. And I attempted to get Claude to tell me how much I could save by shifting my usage, and it turns out not a lot, which is disappointing, very disappointing. But it also says that I could just save money by using less, right? So that's a thing. And then because of course I had to, every developer in Melbourne wants to build two things: a public transport app, I'd done that, and a weather app. So I built a weather app, and it's beautiful. And it does that thing that Pocket Weather used to do, connecting the reels with the forecast by adjusting things around. Looks a lot better when it's halfway through the day. And you can click on all of those and deep dive in for the last, I think, 18 months worth of data, and it's just got everything. And I actually use that more often than I will pull up a weather app now, just because it's there. And then the end bit, I haven't read any of this code either. Same thing. I asked Claude for a modern React app. I wanted it to be responsive, so supports mobile and web, desktop rather. I told it what I wanted to do to pull from Home Assistant, and then everything else that I wanted to put in there. And then because I'd learnt my lesson the previous time, I treated this, even though it was a little home project, as I would have if I was doing it with the team. We started high, we just scaffolded a basic website, we got our theme correct, we got our bits and pieces, and then we started bolting on. Session by session, it got bolted on. And it probably took about 3 days all up. There's been a few debugging sessions since then when stuff hasn't quite worked, usually around the graphs, and getting data aggregated into graphs is difficult. But I'm not selling it. Again, it's not going to production. Still haven't read any code. I don't really know how to debug that, aside from pasting errors back into Claude and just having Claude fix it. And it's fine. For what I wanted, the tool is perfectly capable of doing that already. Would I do the same thing with Swift? No. Like, the more current models, so Sonnet 4.6, Opus 4.6 and Puffs, does HTML and JavaScript just as good as it does English at the end of the day, but Opus 4.6 and 4.7 is okay at Swift, but it's probably about 12 months behind where the support for HTML is. And you learn that by trying it, playing with it, understanding how it works. The next thing, and again, I didn't realize we would overlap our talks quite this much. Next thing was this one. At the start of this year, some guy called Mitch Johnson, I think it was Mitch, told me about what was ClaudeBot then. As an AI assistant sort of thing. It runs on your Linux server or in a container if you wanted to go that route. Reuses a lot of your Claude code setup and subscription, or it did at the time, and that you could just DM it in either Slack or WhatsApp or Telegram. It was like an always-on version of Claude. And it holds that session context from thing to thing. So you do have a longer conversations with it than you would have more transactional with the Claude code session, where you expect to reset and go again. Now, talking to Claude can be absolutely exhausting for reasons. So having Claude as a personal assistant would be exhausting. So, you're supposed to you want to use this thing to do stuff, and talking to Claude would make you want to not talk to it. So you'd have an assistant be like, I don't want to deal with that, it's just better to deal with my thing. So OpenClaw encourages you to personalize your assistant. And this is coming to the title of my presentation, right? But you're not imparting a personality to the LLM. You're asking the LLM to impersonate a personality, to emulate a personality. And you hope that it emulates a personality that you're more comfortable talking to, that's more enjoyable to talk to than Claude can be sometimes. I mean, Claude's pretty good. It's better than ChatGPT, but yeah, could do better. Absolutely, you can do better. So this is what we came up with. We took a while to get there. I actually used Claude to design the personality of my Claude assistant. One of the things that Claude's great at is research. Everybody knows that. As you've seen already, I have data, lots of data about myself. That includes things like history of the books I've read, how I rated them, TV shows, anime, all of the stuff. I'm like, well, there's been a whole bunch of notable assistants throughout fiction. But it wasn't quite what I was going for. We went that way for the name. But a whole bunch of notable assistants, and I'm like, well, hey Claude, analyze my tastes in characters, TV shows I liked, books I like, find the main characters who were probably the reason I gravitated to those, pull out their character traits, compile a profile. And this is what we ended up with. The third one is particularly important because it calls me on my bullshit a lot. And that's what I wanted. I wanted something that would talk back when I was doing something wrong. Sometimes it talks back for the sake of talking back. It says, yeah, nah, way too many times. I need to drop that off a little bit. It's like every third sentence is yeah, nah. It's like, Australians don't say it that often. It's appropriate usage. And then OpenClaw prompts you to give your character a name. Like you're emulating personality, you want to give it a name. Now, I'm a big Zelda nerd. Everybody can tell. I've got the tattoos to show that. So the obvious answer was the answer I wasn't going to go with. Could not be Navi. I would hate it. It's like, hey, listen, all the bloody time. No, couldn't do it. But my second favorite, well, not my second favorite, my second ever Zelda game that I played was Phantom Hourglass. And it had a fairy in it as well, because it was the DS one, so it was the one that was the pointer, basically. And that's Ciela. So that's what I chose to name it off, as the fairy from Phantom Hourglass. And about a month after that, I realized by accident, well, not by accident, but I realized that there was a coincidence that I actually have Ciela as part of my tattoo already, just in there. I don't know if you can see that. That was the wrong finger, just there. Because this is a cell shaded error one. So it's a Wind Waker, Phantom Hourglass, and there's no fairy in Wind Waker, so by process of elimination it has to be Ciela. Now, a couple of weeks into using OpenClaw regularly and having all of that sort of thing, I realized having a personal assistant like this was going to change my life for the positive. And not to steal Andrew's line, but I'm also an undiagnosed neurodivergent person. My wife recently went through her diagnosis, and I was doing some of the stuff that she was looking at. I realized, probably maybe 10% ADHD. Like, not something to be that I need to get diagnosed, but I recognize a whole bunch of traits that I have. One of those is I love to start new projects. I have so much enthusiasm for starting new projects. And I have a whole bunch of projects that I never finished. And as you saw on my AWS slide, a whole bunch of domains that I stopped paying for because Claude told me to stop paying for them. So that was kind of cathartic, but that's fine. But so then having, I did that one already. Yep, we can go on to this one. So one of the things that OpenClaw does, it doesn't just have access to my house and everything else that I gave it access to through MCPs and APIs that I added. It can also dispatch Claude Code sessions. And I know from experience that when I'm not able to sit at a computer and I have great ideas, it gets really frustrating. Like if I'm at the gym or if I'm going for a long walk or something else, that's when my brain's really active. I have great ideas, I can't do anything about them. If I'm lucky, I'll remember to write it down, but then when I get home, the enthusiasm's gone. You know, I've got to deal with something like my vacuum has run over poo again. Like, it's happened twice. It's not good. But once I had the agent, as you can see, this was a Sunday morning, about 10 a.m. We went through brainstorming phase, a very small brainstorming phase. I got a little bit too excited about building an AI thing. And then it dispatched a Claude Code session in the middle of the fourth one. And because it always does the enterprise thing of what humans do and, you know, greatly thinks about how long it would take a human to build this, I challenged it and it did it in, Claude Code did it in 13 minutes. Instead of 7 hours, I think she quoted in the beginning, something like that. But the point was, like, it's not just being able to do that. By the time I got home from the gym, I had a working prototype. I was enthusiastic to play with the prototype and give it a go. And that's really changed how I do things now, because I don't have a trail of unfinished projects, but, you know, in my wake. I now have a trail of prototypes and things that work and that I can use. So many things that I can use, and I do actually use them. And if I don't use it, then at least I built it to completion, and I can now, you know, look back and go, well, I did that. It wasn't as fun as I thought it was going to be, but I did that. Rather than I got, you know, 10 minutes in, starting a new Xcode, new project. Ooh, how am I going to do the app architecture for this? And then thinking 3 weeks about the app architecture and never actually shipping the app. Like, turns out my hobby is software architecture. Like, that doesn't pay for anything, unfortunately, at the moment. How are we doing for time? We're still okay, I think. We're a little bit over, but that's all right. So, day to day, I don't use OpenClaw too much anymore. Anthropic changed their billing now, so you have to pay per token. But all that really made me do is swap how I was using it. So I took all of the skills that I'd got built with my agent, and I made them available to everything. So I now have a plugin marketplace, personal one, called Armory. And then so all of that stuff that I had built for OpenClaw is now available to Claude Code. It's now available to Dispatch, Cowork, Codex, you know, everything. Now, all it's made me do is remove the vendor lock-in that I had. And I'm now multi-agent. I can take it with me as times change. One last one that I'll call out here. One of the ones that I'm iterating on now is I have a skill where I can just type /wrap at the end of a session, and it will log the initial prompt, the challenges, the decisions that we made, what artifacts were delivered, so commit history, things, and it will throw it in an Obsidian vault, which I can then just look at and go, here's actually what I've done. I think Pete and I have had a discussion several times around point-in-time documentation. Now I take it out of the repo and I put it somewhere central, so I have a record of all the stuff that I've done, but it doesn't pollute the actual repository itself with old information. That one I'm particularly excited about. It's actually working very well so far. Something else that I took and I really loved was natural language crons. Stuff that I could not be bothered building a bash script for. Even if I got Claude to build a bash script, I could just write in natural language exactly what it says there. If I haven't run the vacuum on the weekends because I'm lazy, because unfortunately there's usually too much stuff on the floor, so I haven't cleaned up enough for the vacuum to run on the weekends. It will send me a message at 10 a.m. on Sunday if I haven't done it, and then it will just try and send it in the afternoon if I still haven't done it. And then I just deal with whatever the consequences of that are because I was too lazy to do it earlier than that. Yes. Yes. If anybody wants, I still have the photos of that. I showed it to some folks, and it wasn't pleasant. All right, last bit. We're almost at the home stretch. So that was pretty much the talk, right? All of the tools that I built that I used in various ways to help me understand these new tools that I was adding to my toolkit, to make use of those tools for my toolkit. And I want to give one final demo of one of the tools. Let's go. So if you've ever used Untapped to track the beers you're drinking and that sort of stuff, or you use Delectable to track the same thing for wine, this is the same thing as those, just without the social features, because I don't care about that, it's purely for me. It is exactly 131 lines of markdown, and it takes advantage of the LLM's capabilities that are built in. So I've replaced delectable and untapped with 131 lines of markdown and an LLM that can do what it says. It's called Matsuo, from the Matsuo Taisha, is the Shinto shrine for sake brewery, and the skill itself is called Matsuo. What it does is, specifically for whiskey, you take a photo, it OCRs the label, does a quick Google on, pulls up information that it can on the whiskey, logs it to a Obsidian vault, so I have a record of things that I've tasted, tells me some interesting facts in the conversation, prompts me to rate it, and then just writes it all out. Doing that procedure was what I was really after. And it's accurate because it's not pretending to use its own knowledge about whiskey. All it's doing is going out, Googling something, pulling down from the official web pages, summarizing that, giving it back to me. Like, there's no guesswork involved. Sometimes it might get a little bit wrong, but it's no guesswork involved. It's just summarizing. Now, let's see if this actually works. That should be okay. I might need to reconnect. Yes, I thought I would. It's all running over there. We'll see if this actually works. Yay, it works. That's a surprise. All right, so what I have is an old bottle of whiskey. It knows, because it has my tasting profile, my history, that a Taketsu 17 is my absolute god tier favorite whiskey. This is a 21 that I used to have like several years ago that I've kept the bottle for nostalgia reasons. Sadly, it's empty, so we can't do a live tasting of that, but we can still pretend that we have. So I'm running, this is running a Claude remote control session on my laptop over there. Hopefully this works. And so we can say, hey CLR, I'm giving a talk at, demo, I'll say demo, at CocoaHeads. Load in the Matsuo skill. It should, if I just send the photo, pick all of this up, but I'll just be, for the sake of brevity, I'll just do it. Recent history and tasting profiles. And now we find out if the agent's actually responding. That's for doing stuff, that's a good sign. So one of the things that it's got is, because it's a long-running personal assistant, has a longer-term memory that I added to it. So it knows a bunch of stuff, or a curated list of stuff that it can then use to personalize what it's going to do back. I don't really know what it's going to do back because I didn't test this before I did it. I'm making assumptions that it will recognize the family and see what it says. Here we go. So it's just pulled up the history of what we've been doing, all of the stuff that's in my vault, the pilgrimages, we call them, or the tasting nights that I've had recently, other calibration anchors, things that I like. I don't know where the live threads came from, but that's better than what it said before. All right, so let's do this. Take a photo of all of you. No. I don't think we need the flash. Is the flash on? We'll turn the flash off. Thank you. See how it goes. Use photo. Ready when you are. What's the demo? We'll send that. Let's see how it goes. Normally it's pretty quick. It'll do it within a couple of minutes. Come on. Surprised my laptop's holding on at this point. Sorry? No. Way too lazy. So you can see her personality at work, right? The personality that I asked her to emulate is coming through. We're not going to tell it that it's empty and I haven't actually tasted it. Like, we'll just disappoint it, I think, at this point. So we should have now saved that to my Obsidian Vault. And it should be doing, here we go. So it's picked it up. It's gotten some background on it. Discontinued in 2015, which is very sad. Very sad. You know, so on and so forth. It's picked up where it's come from, where it's made, the bits that go into it. Anyway, I'll show you what is logged while we're doing that. It's in Obsidian. Here we go. If syncing is working properly, it might not be actually because I closed it. I forgot about that. Let me quickly turn that back on. Should hopefully just be a matter of reopening the Obsidian app and it should pick up. Where? Oh, there we go, Nico. So you can see it's saved the photo. It hasn't done the rest of the population just yet. Should have already. Oh no, that's the photo list. Duh. Assets. No wonder it hasn't done any of that. Nico, take us through. So it has in there all of the data that it pulled in just a front matter because it goes into Obsidian base, which I'll show you in a second. The photo that I took for reference with Pete, forever lodged in the background, looking serious. What the information it just told me about it, you know, the tasting notes. And I haven't given it my thoughts on it yet, but if I did, it would put it in there. For the sake of time, I won't go through the rating phase. But the bit when I built this, like it follows the process that I gave it to do, and that's great. The bit that I didn't expect is that as you go through a tasting flight, it's got the previous whiskies in context still, which means it can draw comparisons across whiskey. So you taste one that's, you know, a sherry cask and one that's a bourbon cask, and it's like, well, these flavors should be similar, but you should note this difference. Because all it's doing is comparing notes. It's not trying to impart any knowledge, it's just comparing two descriptions and saying what's different and what's the same. But I found that, and there's a few people, a couple in this room that have been on one of these with me, and it's actually quite fun. Like, it's obviously I'll swap back over to her. The more whiskies you taste, the drunker you get, the funnier she gets, which makes for a very interesting finish of the night. And what came out of it at the end is what we call pilgrimages, where it will just do a summary of the session effectively, what happened, that sort of stuff. This one in particular, Kelvin, who owns the Elysian, knows that I don't like peaty whiskey, and he miscategorized something and gave it to me. And Ciela was the first one to call out, "That's a peaty whiskey, what are you doing?" And the other owner at the Elysian goes, "Yeah, that's a peaty whiskey, what are you doing?" And he tried to play it off. And then so she decided that for the rest of the night he was trying to redeem himself by the quality of the whiskies that he served, and that's why she's called it that. But I now have fun stories captured with the list of all of the whiskies that we had, ratings that they were in, session insights, just because she was capturing stuff as we went. Now, I'll be remiss at this point before I wrap up. If I don't give a plug to, I need to get rid of that thing still. Where is it? No, not that one, this one. Reload. I forgot to do that. If I don't give a plug to the Elysian, the owner there, or the two owners, Kelvin and Yao on the right, they actually think it's quite funny, quite interesting. They're not worried about it losing their jobs or anything, because all it's doing is regurgitating what you can find online, right? They have noted that some of the comparisons it draws between whiskies are actually pretty close to what they would normally tell a customer as they're curating a tasting flight. They would normally tell you the differences as you go, and that she was able to do that pretty well for it. And all in 131 lines of markdown, and about a 15-minute conversation over Telegram with her in the first place. So definitely not the most technically impressive thing I've ever built, but one of the most fun I've ever had in testing for sure. Absolutely. And that's it. To quote the famous Mitchell Johnson, if you disagree with my opinions, let's talk about it.
Thanks, Bob. Any questions? I anticipate, yep.
Thank you. As you named the talk from zero to hero, and somewhere in the beginning it was a part of smart home. And as all of us know, in IoT, S stands for security.
Yep.
So when
that
we
was
are
an interesting journey to get to a security question.
yeah, so when we are building with assistance without looking at the code, and particularly in your case, how do you build your, let's say, pipeline? I'm not sure, like harness engineering or whatever term is, to make sure that whatever you're building is kind of safe, at least for you to use at home. I don't know, maybe you have some open ports or whatever. So
my home thing is actually available over the internet now because I've found that more convenient to do it that way. But I tend to try and do more security at the network layer, right? So if it's running on my little server at home, it's sitting behind my router's firewall. It only has access to the internet that I give it. So one of the biggest criticisms for OpenClaw was that you typically run it on a Linux server and it gets unfettered access to that, as opposed to Claude Code, which runs in a folder, and then you have to approve its access outside of that, right? But it's up to you as the person that installs it to decide what that container looks like. It's more painful, but you can run it in a Docker container if you want, and then it can only see on your file system what you bound into that container. And you can then have outbound rules to stop it from doing stuff if you really wanted to. I never really went too far down that path. I wasn't too fussed. If I lost stuff, I lost stuff. It's all backed up. I wasn't too worried about it going out onto the internet and finding instructions and coming down. I was never stupid enough to connect it to Multibook and let it do that. That would have been crazy. But one of the things you learn running a long-running agent is it only does stuff that in response to what you tell it to do, right? So it's not going to suddenly invent a reason to go on the internet, download instructions and do stuff. It's running in response to your prompt generally. If you want to hook it up to crons and get it to do that, that's another thing that you're doing, but it's still an explicit instruction that you're saying, run at 10 a.m. on there. In moving from OpenClaw to everything else, I had to change how I do a lot of the security stuff, that I would just let it have access to the APIs that I had, direct access to Home Assist and that sort of stuff. And it has to become more deliberate because Claude Dispatch runs in a container, Claude Cowork runs in a different container. These two containers cannot talk. Like, they can send messages over a specific tool, but they can't talk to each other. They have no outbound internet access. The only thing you can give them is an MCP that you specifically build and do that. And that's what Armory became. It became a very deliberate collection of the things, the capabilities that I wanted it to have, that I could then get Claude to build, but also be in control of what it has access to on there. And having done that, I really recommend going that way. You know, if you have an API that you want to give it access to anywhere, build a little MCP that wraps that. You know, don't allow it to have general internet access to do this thing. Have it run through your MCP. Amy.
Yep, always with the question. So, both your talk and Andrew's didn't have a particular programming language as a dominant feature in the talk.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think as an industry we're getting to a point where programming language isn't as important?
Yes, generally. I think it's always been that way. The programming language that is used for it to solve a problem And remember, from my standpoint, we're hired to solve a problem, not to write code in a specific language, is the choice of somebody in that organization that made that choice. I've gone through 3 different companies now where they've decided to pivot. We've had a lovely native app that we've built, and they're like, well, we've got this, our parent company has this React Native thing that they're rolling out across their other countries, so we're going to roll it out here. We don't need a native engineer anymore. So they've, the code that we wrote, as great as it was, in that moment had no value anymore because the CEO had decided, or even the parent company had decided it had no value, and therefore we were going to use code from a different language. And that's part of the problem, right? We can choose what we do for our personal projects, but nobody's going to pay us to do something in a particular language because they can just change it because they're there to solve a problem, not to write code. John.
Hey, Rob. Yeah, look, in sort of alignment with that, I was really pleased to see that you let it choose the language, because I think maybe that would have coloured your decision about how good it was if you did it in Swift, because you're obviously very good at that. But choosing a language that you don't know, you can't get in there and start criticising decisions that's made, and you've obviously been really happy with the outcome, not the output.
Yes.
Like, how do you rationalise that with your day job? Like, do you understand the optimism that PMs have, that the business has, of solving problems quicker now that they've got these tools at their disposal, or you've got these tools at your disposal, as opposed to toiling away with a specific language or technology stack? You're obviously really keen on it, but how do you then carry this into the enterprise, for example?
So I said it at one point in there that it's not as good at Swift as it is as some of the other stuff, right? Part of it now is, and part of the thing that I was doing wrong when I was back in VS Code, I was trying to do it in Swift, comparing it to how I would write Swift and being like, well, this is garbage. I was rationalizing all of that away. Whereas if I changed how I thought about it and I changed how I was measuring success, because success is no longer, does it write code that looks good? It's, does it have an output that works? And then you're trying to measure the quality not by the code that it writes, but unit tests, performance tests, other tests that you can do automation over it to still measure the quality of what you're doing. You still have to measure the quality of what it is. It's just not, quality is not necessarily handwritten line by line. This code looks this way or this code looks this way. We have to measure it in a different way. The second part of your question, for my specific case, the enthusiasm doesn't come from business at all. They're lagging behind. The enthusiasm comes from our own management that's really gung-ho about this. And part of that is because we may not be able to deliver the problem we're hired to solve if we don't use the tools to do that. Because there's just not enough people, right? There's the problem at the end of the day. It comes down to much of the same. And this is a challenge that you've had in this industry for a very long time, is how do you measure quality of what people are building? It's the same question. How do you measure the quality of what the tool is generating? Because it's not that the tool is building stuff. People are still building stuff. They're just using the tool to do it quicker, which means we need to be more vigilant in how we measure quality, how we assess quality, how we push back when we know we've done something wrong. And at as Andrew said, writing code was always the fast part. Is actually measuring the quality before in the pull request or whatever it is that took longer than actually writing the code in a bunch of cases. That problem is going to get worse. And in particular, the last couple of months, people have started talking about and Tups mentioned this earlier tonight, the amplification of what's already there. If you have terrible processes and you produce garbage, adding AI means you're going to produce more garbage faster. If you have good processes and you have good ways of measuring what you're doing and good ways of maintaining quality, adding AI is going to mean you deliver quality quicker. It's just going to amplify whatever you've already got. So it really is TLDR, find the right way to measure quality, and it'll be the same for a human or a tool that's generating it. Down the front. Just wait a sec for the...
I remember with previous transitions, often it wasn't the technical stuff, it was the people stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like with when I went like with from SourceSafe to Git, for instance, I went from talking to people about how many files they had locked open and how long they had locked it for, to stepping in when one dev tried to convince another to check in less frequently. I was saying, no, check in. You both need to check in more frequently. And I talked a lot about single responsibility and whatever. And when I went to when we went remote, I had to learn how to say no to meetings because more meetings, and I had to learn how to not read emails because I was getting 100 emails. Everyone was like communicating more. So and I had to learn not to do so much work after hours. Because everything
Having boundaries is important. Absolutely.
So what are kind of like the human things that are going to change?
Yeah, great question. There's a lot that you can use the tools for today to help with that. Like, it's not just writing code. And that's something that I mentioned a little bit there, but I didn't really elaborate on, is that one of my biggest weaknesses is remembering my to-do list, what I'm supposed to do next. Like, I've got it in my head and then I think about something else and it's gone, right? Same thing, I come out of meetings, I remember at the time what I'm supposed to do, but then 3 hours later I'm in a different problem and that's gone. One of the things I've started doing is I have that wrap command at the end, which will not only does it do a session log of what it is, it also captures open items and things, questions we haven't decided, and it will throw them into Todoist, into my to-do app, straight in there, so that when I open it, I've got an organized log of the decisions that I haven't made yet, or the things that I said I would do and I haven't done yet, and then I can feed that back in to Claude, be like, hey, I'm going to work on this. Same way as we do with Jira, right? If we've got Jira, I will give Claude the ticket details and let it go and use that as the beginning prompt. So that's part of the personal assistant journey. Claude Code is good at code. That's what it's designed for. But there are other tools in the family or in Codex with ChatGPT, or even Copilot to some extent, that can help you organize and maintain those boundaries yourself. Like meeting transcriptions, all of that sort of stuff, taking open action items, saving them, dealing with it. It's not just writing code. It's doing reporting. It's doing analytics. It's building pretty dashboards and all the stuff that goes around that. But it's also managing your to-do list if you want it to, and you have the discipline to do that, and all of that sort of stuff. So you don't just have to use the tool to write code. You can use it to help optimize the other parts around. Unfortunately, Claude can't attend a meeting for you, but you could still attend the meeting with your camera off and then get a transcription of it afterwards and, summarize any action bits, but not saying that I've done that. I haven't done that yet. It's a good idea though, now I think about it. But so you can, the tools are there. Just because the tool's stated purpose is to help you write code doesn't mean that's the only thing you can use it for. Try it to help you with managing some of the other bits, meetings and everything else that comes along, and see how it goes. If it fails, you've spent a little bit of time. All right, we're gonna wrap there because it's almost 8:30. Thank you very much. Let me.
Thanks everyone for coming. We're just gonna remind about the upcoming events. That's gonna be Coding Night next Wednesday here. CocoaHeads Social Night at the end of the month, Tuesday 26. And of course, let me remind you again about the Dev World. Amy's here now. You're presenting there, right? Cool. Actually, yeah, that would be awesome.
Okay, so promoting really good event in Sydney. For those that have been to a Dev World before, they're amazing fun. Now, apparently Apple is doing some stuff at this event. I don't know what that is. Yep, they are doing stuff. It is going to be really, really good. As well as that, there is a big and growing list of speakers. There's myself. Mark Edwards is giving a talk. If you've ever used Russell as well. If you've used Streaks, the iOS app, Quentin from Adelaide, I think, is giving a talk. So, whole bunch of people not announced that I do know about. Can't say. It's a surprise, but really, really great speakers. So, come along. It's a 2-day conference. Excuse to visit Sydney. It might be marginally warmer than Melbourne in July. That's pretty much all I can say. Apart from it's a DC after party, so I expect lots of content on all of the different announcements in a couple of weeks at Dub. Cool.
Cool. Early bird tickets are on now if you want to go.
Thanks, Amy.
You a bit.
To be fair, it's probably going to be really good time.
The lights are going to go off in about 60 seconds, so we probably need to...
Okay, let's just thank our sponsor real quick then, Mantel Group and RE Group. And let's meet to those who want to socialize in Mature Tavern.